Most startup stories you hear online skip the ugly parts, the confusion, the pivots, the moments where everything feels like it's about to collapse.
There's a level of naivety, which you sort of need as a startup founder, because if you knew how hard it was, would you do it?
But that's exactly where the real lessons are. Will Glass left a comfortable corporate job thinking he had a killer idea. Turns out he had nothing but a vague thesis and a lot of blind optimism.
We burn so much money building stuff because oh, that would be cool, or we should do that. That would automate this process, but the process doesn't work.
Today, he's pulling back the curtain on what it really looks like to build a startup, how to navigate uncertainty, deal with failure, and figure out what people actually want before you run out of time and money. I'm Pat Zingarella, and this is Certainty and Chaos. Mr. Will Glass, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Pat. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so Will, I know you've been on the Ostrich chain for a long time. I remember being part of the beta way back in the day when it was a gamified personal finance app, and it was clunky as every MVP is. But tell us a little bit about what Ostrich is, and I'd love to hear your journey of how it became what it is today.
Yeah, happy to give a little background. And obviously we know each other from Gartner days.
Yeah.
That's my background was software sales and doing that similar to you, right? We were working with early stage startups, all different sectors, but got some of the smartest founders, CTOs, CEOs, CMOs, and learned a ton. And that kind of got me thinking about what could I build? What could we build? And I guess to give a little more context, I'm from Alabama, and growing up, I had multiple members in my family that filed bankruptcy. Parents' relationship, a big reason that it fell apart was due to finances, and experienced what happens when you don't get this stuff right at a young age and how it just impacts every other area of your lives. And there's stuff that you can do when you're young that we don't really talk about, but if you do it, it can set yourself up for success. And so I've always been passionate about finance. And that's one of the things that we connected with, right? When we were at Gartner, was going to the real estate investment meetings and
go to tour some duplexes down in San Carlos Park. And
Exactly. Yeah. Just going to look at like the worst real estate you could imagine because it was a cheap price, and trying to figure out ways to get out of that 9-to-5 kind of rat race. So always had that little entrepreneurial nature, had that inclination towards personal finance, and then being around software founders. I was looking around, I was like, that's somebody that I could see myself being. Like, I really admire what these people are doing, building, and so naively decided to go that path. But yeah, like I said, at Ostrich, what we do is we have a financial health app for high school, college students. And our aim is to get them to actually take actions that are good for them. We've pivoted a number of times. We started direct to consumer. We then sold to universities, and now we're selling to credit unions. And so the sales have pivoted in terms of how we do what we do. And we have a component of what we do that is actually very in-person. So we use like software in our services. So it's a little bit like software-enabled services that we do now. So we're all over the place. And the reason being is that we didn't think through a lot of things early on in terms of our business model and made a lot of mistakes. So we pivoted a number of times.
Yeah.
And happy to like talk a little bit about that. But that's my background at a high level, and we can dive in wherever you want to dive, Pat.
Yeah, dude, for sure. Tell us like the early days, right? You were in a W-2 at Ramesh, right? And you've been an entrepreneur. What was the cracking point, and like where was the friction of, oh yeah, I'm doing this, and then I also don't know what I'm doing. I don't have the money to do it, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Yeah. So I think at Gartner, I was lucky because I ended up with some really good mentor sales managers like Drew Jansen. There's some other people out there that were really helped. And so I overperformed from what I should have done on the sales side, and was able to save a lot. Living in Fort Myers, we didn't have a lot of expenses. And
actually, back then, it's different now, but back then it was easy. Yeah.
I know. I think I paid $600 a month in rent, and then it went up to $800 or something. And obviously had roommates and stuff, but can you imagine that? And it was nice, nice gated neighborhoods and houses and all that kind of stuff that like now it's like,
no
insane.
shot. Yeah.
So definitely benefited from that, and it was very frugal, saved up a lot, knowing that I wanted to do something with it, real estate, startup. And then ended up, like you said, moving to New York for an AI startup that was one of my clients. So they poached me, and I went up there and was like excited to come in the startup thing and learned absolutely how chaotic it is, and why on the Gartner side I couldn't get anyone to sign anything or figure some of that stuff out. And you're like, I get it, because it literally changes from day to day. You could have a conversation that is exactly what we're doing, and the next week it's totally different. So I totally understand. I started to understand the chaos. But yeah, I mean, was making good money. I think like at Gartner, starting salary was on target earnings was 60K and doubled it my first year because of their commission structure. So it was doing well at Gartner, and then Remesh essentially matched that with a better kind of compensation plan. The only challenge is that they probably overhired, and this isn't just to love all the guys there. This is something I think they would admit too, is just hired too many salespeople before getting like sales leadership and didn't really have product market fit fully figured out, didn't overhire salespeople. Our comp structure, the one that I signed on, literally changed the first week that I started. And then it changed like 3 times, and I ended up leaving probably 7 or 8 months in. So I was just, I was kind of wanting to get involved in startups, and Remesh was a great place and learned a lot. Started going to I moved to New York City, started doing all of the startup communities there. Like there's a ton of great events that I would go to. Stacklist does some great events. Techstars does great events, and was just trying to like get immersed and figure things out. And I'd like written a business plan while I was at Gartner it was more of a thesis. I'll say, here's like a thesis on what I think is wrong with personal finance, and kept coming back to it. And then I'd keep having these conversations over and over. And eventually I was just like, you know what? If I want to solve this, I just need to do it. And naively just jumped straight into it. It was like, all right, finally, this is it. They like changed structures again. Like the one guy that I really loved working with, I was no longer going to work with that guy at Remesh. And he's still at the company, but like they restructured. And I was like, all right, I just can't, I'm done. Like I'm not going to make any money. They keep changing the comp structures the way that they are. And I'm just not that in it. I want to do this thing myself and figure it out and bet on myself. And so that was kind of the impetus. It was not the way that I would recommend anybody start a company today or do it again. But realistically, that's what happened. I was just like, had enough and like naive and was like, all right, screw it. I've got enough money saved up. I can invest in money into the company and I'll be able to live fine for a while. That was it. And I connected with my co-founder, Andrew. We'd been friends in college. And so he'd been talking about it, and his now wife was like, you guys should do this. And so we did. So I quit first, and then he quit 6 months later.
Oh, nice. You both went all in. That's awesome.
We both went all in. So yeah,
which is kind of how it's like there's 2 paths. I was the same way. Like I can't usually, and it's funny, it's contradictory to some of these personal finance pitches where like build up enough cash flow so you can leave. It's like, nah, I can't compartmentalize. I just can't do it. I gotta go. It's either I'm gonna fail or I'm going down with the ship. It's interesting, dude.
It's so true. So you say that, it's funny because I told my boss, you can probably tell I just haven't been in it. And he goes, what are you talking about? You're like, I couldn't tell at all. And in my mind, I had my foot off the gas. I wasn't really pushing. And he was like, what are you talking about? He was tough, like very just blindsided by it. And I was like, I don't know. Mentally, I know that I'm not all in right now. And I feel like I haven't been for the last whatever. But the fact that I'm still getting by, just maybe that tells you a little bit more about corporate America than it does anything else. But
yeah. So when that happened, you left, Andrew left. You got the business plan, maybe still in the idea phase. Have you guys sought out the development firm? Have you built like the wireframes for the MVP, or what stage were you at when you like, this is it, I'm going for it?
Pat, we didn't have anything but a freaking thesis. It was so stupid. It was so stupid. We had some ideas and so, what are we going to do on this? We could do whatever. I don't know. We don't want to go blogs or courses. There's a bunch of people. That's not really a product. And we ended up falling in, doing some tests on Facebook groups for this idea of like challenges. Can we get people and like accountability? So that was a big thing that we really focused on, was like accountability, setting goals, and like incorporating that into personal finance. There was already Mint. I was a huge user of Mint. There's dashboards. We didn't want to redo what dashboarding apps were already doing out there in the PFM, personal financial management and space. And well, let's do this idea of social. So that was our big thing. Can we gamify it? Can we make it social? Can we just use those things that are proven when you look at goal setting and hitting goals? Can we apply that to personal finance? So that was the idea. That was like the thesis of, can we get people to actually take action? That's like the underlying first principle, that people don't take financial actions even if they learn things. So we didn't want to focus on education. All the education's out there, but people weren't doing this and still aren't doing this necessarily. And so that was the one thing that's been consistent from the beginning. Everything else has changed. But we did Facebook groups, and we used Facebook groups to test this kind of concept. Then we tried to build a web version on WordPress. Terrible, didn't work. Skipped to, okay, we learned this doesn't work. Let's use no code. So I found some no code builders. where you could build mobile apps with like drag and drop type interfaces, and then realized, okay, I don't know how to hook this up to a back end now. And it just kept rolling. And so that's how the product came about. We were doing surveys and customer interviews throughout that. Not enough, for sure.
Never enough. Yeah.
And we never really figured out what the business model would be, if that made sense. We thought a little bit about the product, but we were like, oh, eventually we'll just become a fintech company. We'll become a bank and we'll make money. And that's the stupidest, most naive thing that you think about. It's like, oh, we'll just eventually become a bank. That's easy. But at that time, to give you context, this was 2019, 2020. So you're in the ZIRP years, zero interest rate years, and money was just flying into fintech at this point in time. So in our mind, we were like, there's a ton of stuff going on. This is going to be easy. What do you mean? And there hadn't been a bunch of consent orders, and like regulatory stuff hadn't come down, which has happened over the last 2 to 3 years. But yeah, but that's where we were. That was the early part. It was just a lot of naivety and energy.
Yeah. When did that shift from like naive energy to, oh boy, this is a little scary? Or did you get traction in enough time where it didn't become scary?
We definitely didn't get traction enough time for it not to become scary. There's a couple things that we started doing. I kept going to these startup meetups, anything that I could go to. COVID hit, which kind of threw that off. So it became a lot harder to do this. They became virtual. But we got plugged into Empire Startups, which I will always be forever grateful to John Zanoff, who runs that organization. But it's like one of the first, I would say, groups focusing on fintech in New York City, founded in 2010, 2011, before fintech was even like a thing really. And he's an investor, but also just community builder, used to run Techstars. And so just like super knowledgeable and plugged into the space. And I forgot how I ended up on an email list or something, but there was a financial wellness pitch that AARP was sponsoring. We applied, and I think I applied like the first day it came out, which was probably the only reason that we got in, was that John was just like, wow, somebody actually applied right away. And we were one of the companies that got to pitch, and it was I forgot how much it was, maybe $25K. We definitely did not win. We were the earliest company. Like even the pitch decks and stuff that we're doing was just so bad. Like I'm like so bad. And
are you
super
good in
helpful.
those situations? You're up on stage pitching. Is that a comfort zone for you? Or is it like, hey, I'm about to throw up and I don't know what I'm saying type scenario?
I like it now. I like it. So growing up, I did like some acting stuff. So my grandparents were like big entertainers. Grandfather he was in some movies and TV shows, small stuff, but he was a comedian. My grandmother was a big band singer, loved performing. And then my mom was an actress. She worked in LA as a working actress for 7 years and actually made money. Never made it big, but made money, and wasn't one of those starving artist types.
Yeah.
And so I have a little bit of that where as long as I feel comfortable in the setting, I like it. I enjoy it. So yes, but in terms of getting comfortable, it took a while to get there because it's a little different when you're like pitching to try to get something. But he said something that I think is really important for founders to understand. Those pitch competitions, it's a marketing exercise. So he said it's a marketing exercise. You're never going to be able to cover your entire business. And if they give you 30 minutes, you'll still never be able to cover everything about your business that you want to cover. But in a 5-minute or a 10-minute pitch, less is more, just as simple as possible. And then you want questions on the back end because you usually get questions. And that's fine as long as you can direct the question set. So it's a marketing exercise. And I could say, yeah, we have a personal finance app that like you want to lead people to the questions that eventually you want. So anyway, that was one of the things that he taught us that was really helpful and impactful early on and helped us because AARP brought us into their accelerator. And that's when things we started figuring things out because they actually put resources behind us. And that was really cool. And the resources were like just a dedicated person to help guide us with resources that we need, connecting us with people, and even putting up money for not Gartner, but GLG, which is very similar, where you can talk to experts. So we were able to like suss out a couple different business models that we were thinking about. But we went so deep because we had nothing else going on. We didn't know anything else. All the other companies that were in this program, they'd already raised money. They had VCs. They had all these resources. We had nothing. So we just talked to everyone. And by the end of it, they all loved us because we were the only ones talking to everybody. Like they were like, oh, you should talk to this person. Great. We'll talk to every person at AARP that you can put us in touch with that's an expert in something. And they actually ended up being the first investors in the company. So they wrote the first check, and they don't do that off of everything. And I'm not sure, I don't think I can talk too much about how their structure works, but the stuff that's public, they do have a small little investment fund where they can write small checks into companies, and they're pretty good terms too. So the terms are really favorable to just go at your either round that you're raising, we'll just invest on that, or they can do safe that's very
cool.
flexible, or just match whatever terms you've already done. So they're super, super friendly, super helpful. At least they were for us. And so that's when things really got a little more serious. Oh man, like all the stuff we've been doing before, we were just spinning our wheels, weren't doing the right things. And that set us on a better trajectory. We didn't figure it out by any stretch of the imagination. There's still a lot of failure to come from there, but that was what I'd say when it was like, oh, we're no longer like playing startup.
Yeah. So when you got into AARP, I know the investors came after. For those that don't know what an accelerator is, did you have to give up a piece of Ostrich to get access to those research, or was it just like a mentorship you're in because of this pitch type of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a bunch of different types of accelerators, incubators out there. Some of them require you to give up some sort of equity. They'll usually give you funding. Some you pay to be a part of. There's no fee equity, which is what AARP was. There was no equity requirement. There was no fee. You just had to go through their process to get selected. And we didn't even know their process. We just stumbled into it, of like how their funnel works to get into their accelerator. And yeah, so that's how we got plugged in there. And then we've done a ton of other ones now since, and I do really recommend those. There are a lot that are no fee, no equity, and we've had great experiences. There's one called Rally that's for social entrepreneurship that's down in Orlando. That's fantastic. They take companies from all over the world and they'll get you plugged in. The city of Orlando is one of the partners, and it's a nonprofit. So they're really good about that. Capital One, we did a Capital One as well. We've done Village Capital. They had a program, again, for kind of social entrepreneurship startups. I think it was health and fintech, but they do different ones. So we've done a number now since, and I get something different out of each one because the company's in a different life cycle, even though they often cover some of the same topics. They're super valuable, but I think the most valuable one that I've ever done was Startup Leadership Program, SLP, which is out of New York. There's technically global, but New York's really the most active chapter. And that one's just a fellowship for founders. There is a fee for that one, but it's a 6-month program, and you get way more than your money back, and it's $400 or $500 in terms of the fee. That one I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. And afterwards, I was like, this is the most impactful thing I've ever done, because it was just so community focused. So there's different flavors. There's your Techstars, which do take equity. We haven't done those. We've applied. We've made it to some of the past the interview rounds, but never were selected for that, or like Y Combinator or anything like that. And looking back at us in our applications, I don't blame anyone for not taking us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's various different accelerator programs, but they are super helpful. And if you're a first-time founder, I would definitely recommend getting plugged into those. And especially if you can find ones where they really focus on community with the other founders. Those have been the most important. And that's why I really like that SLP program, is it was all founders. So there was no like, you're trying to pitch to get money at the end, because that creates some sort of like potential tension between the other founders in the cohort, where you're like competing against each other, but you're supposed to be cooperating. So some of them get a little funky, or, hey, Y Combinator and Techstars business model is they invest it at a smaller rate, and then by the end of the program, they get you to raise more and they can mark up their investment. And I'll get you the resources, but that's how they make money. And again, there's nothing wrong with how these are structured. You just have to know when you go into an accelerator program, what's their economics, what's their kind of focus. And the nonprofit ones are great. The Capital One, for example, was just like, they're just trying to get more startups. So they're like, there was no equity. There was no promise that you'll get to work with Capital One. They just were like, we need to be doing more innovation stuff. And a lot of corporates are like that. So there are a lot of corporate programs. Not all of them are the same. So I definitely look into that. But being able to talk to other people that have gone through the programs will give you all the answers that you need.
Yeah, that's sweet, man. That's great. And okay, we've gone through AARP. We've met with resources, investors. We've got a frame of reference of what's to come next. At that point in time, what was the conversation like between you and Andrew in terms of sunk cost versus we got to go a different direction? Meaning, hey, we put so much time and energy into this version of what we were producing, to, hey, like it seemed good at the time, but now we have to pivot. It's not an easy decision, but to change everything you're doing.
Right. The pivots for us came from naively, we should have had a better idea of our customer and business outcomes that we were in our business model, but we didn't. And so that money was like, oh, great. Now we can like move off of the no code thing to go build the thing that we want, because that's what's been stopping us from getting customers, is that the platform just doesn't do what we need it to do. And to some degree that was true. And we were able to test things as we went, but for us, we can finally build, like we can finally build what we need to build. So that's where our investment went. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in today's day and age, even if you have no idea, if you're not technical, and this is just for for software businesses, like I've been playing around with like Bolt and Lovable and some of these AI tools. It's so easy to write code. Like it is so easy. And now you still probably need somebody that can actually think it all up, because you got to get in the back end, the database, and troubleshoot things. But I've been thinking, I was like, if this stuff was around when I was playing around with AppGyver and frickin' the no code stuff that I was doing, we would have been able to iterate and launch so much more quickly with way less money, figured out what worked, didn't work, and maybe things would have actually been different there. So I do think that there is a lot of value in that, but when you raise your money, you want to know what you're going to use it on. And we were using it to build, which there's nothing wrong with that if you know the thing that you're going to build is something worth paying for. Whereas if you've already built something and you've already got indication that, hey, look, there's some value here, somebody's willing to pay for this, then that's great. You can continue to build or add the features that you need to get to the next customer, but you can also put some money into marketing. And that doesn't mean just buy Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads or something like that, but you can actually use it to grow because you've already figured something out, rather than let's raise money and figure it out, which is what we ended up doing. We kind of figured some things out, but I wish we would have taken that approach. So that's what we used the money for, Pat, was to essentially build. And then once we had a better MVP, we then started testing and realized, okay, you know what? Maybe this direct-to-consumer approach isn't the right way to go, but you know what? We got a school to pay for it. So maybe we should go after universities. And then NIL was like a big thing that happened. Oh, financial literacy is a big part of NIL. Let's go down that path. And so we stumbled into it because we realized who was getting value from our tests. And it was the school, and it was student athletes, and it was college students who were like, oh, this is interesting. And we'd also tested, when we were testing this whole concept, we tested with by going and selling to companies. So that was the other way that we were looking at, was like companies or direct to consumer. And we worked with a school district in Austin, Texas, and there were some decent results, but everybody was all over the place in terms of their financial needs, because you had teachers that had just graduated and had a bunch of student loan debt, and they're just trying to figure out their life. And then you had 63-year-old teachers that were going to retire, realized that their pension isn't going to cover their lifestyle, and they don't know what to do. So it's really hard to serve those two very distinct customer segments, because their needs financially are just different, what you can do when you're 22 than when you're 63 and you're about to retire. So those were some of the things that we learned, because we weren't super focused on what's the value that we drive.
Yeah. What is your relationship like with investors during that process? For example, you mentioned there's a lot of steps involved in raising capital. And how did you build trust with people when it was like, hey, we're going to raise money and then figure it out? And then what is the conversation like with investors after they give you capital and you're going into something new?
So we've not raised from like institution. Venture capital is very different. Even seasoned angel investors is different. The AARP was a proof point, and that was enough for some of the friends and family that had expressed interest. And we'd actually pushed them off. There were people that said, hey, we want to invest, and we pushed them off because we're like, we kind of want to figure some things out first. But we felt like we'd figured something out at that time. Looking back, I know that we hadn't, but at the time when you're in it, you're like, oh man, we got this thing figured out. Like, we know exactly what's going to happen. We just need to build this. So there's a level of, again, naivety, which you need as a startup founder, first time founder, because if you knew how hard it was, would you do it? And everybody says that. And then you got to have the kind of psychos like us that are like, all right, it's going to be different for me.
Yeah.
Or I'm just such a masochist. I'll just dive right in there anyway.
Yeah.
So the conversation, here's a proof point. Here's our plan. We'd done enough now where we had a strategy. We had something that was it made sense. You could see a pathway towards revenue, towards success. And so that we just went back to those folks that had already expressed interest. And, some of them wrote checks. We small checks. I don't think we got anything above. We didn't even, everything was around 5K, maybe a little bit more. 6, 7K was the max that we took. So we took small checks from friends and family, and it was like very upfront. This could easily go to zero.
Yeah.
but here's why we're excited about it. Here's what we've already accomplished and here's where we're going. And those conversations, I think there's some people that want to, they trusted me, they trusted Andrew because they knew us. They'd seen the success that we'd had outside of the startup world and the corporate world. And so there's a level of trust that already existed. In terms of building trust with folks that you don't know, I think that's harder. And that's why you typically don't raise from people you don't know. That's why they tell you to start talking to investors earlier on.
Yeah.
And they ask for advice and get money, but you really don't want to ask for advice unless you actually want some guidance. And I would like you can tell the genuine advice seeking questions versus the non.
Sure.
And I've seen that too, where like they're asking for advice, but you can tell they really just want money.
Yeah.
And investors can see through that. So there's still, just like anything, you need to build relationships because people don't invest where there isn't a relationship for the most part, unless you're just like the hottest startup out there, in which case it doesn't matter. None of this advice matters because you're going to be able to raise no matter what, because people you've already figured something out. So in lieu of just insane traction and momentum and hype, I mean, you just got to build those relationships. And we started doing that too, talking to investors, but we just we wanted to get a little bit further before we raised that money and figure more things out, have revenue, be in a better position as well, just in a better position for valuation. And you just feel more confident when you raise from somebody like that, because when you raise institutional money, you're on the hamster wheel. You have 18 to 24 months to get to the next milestone and raise, or that's it. That's kind of the end of your company. And so I will say that's one of the things that we probably have done is that, like cockroaches, you hear this, it's hard to kill a cockroach. When you don't have a ton of expenses, you're not paying yourself, you're not doing these things, like you're hard to kill because your burn rate is so much lower than if you're burning $100,000 a month. Good luck. You have to raise institutional capital, or you just got to have a ridiculous amount of revenue to be able to justify that kind of burn rate. So yeah, I don't know if I went off on a tangent there, Pat.
No, that's good, man. Yeah. And sometimes it's all you need is to be that cockroach and last. There are going to be so many other competitors that go through that VC cycle, and it's like, you have to hire with the money. They want to see how fast you could spend it. And that's one of the reasons we go back and forth with raising money is, do we want the daddy overlord, or do we want to be scrappy, not take money, reinvest every dollar we have, push it out, and then retain full control? And it's a tough decision because you see how much bigger and faster you can go with that fat check. And it's, do you want a big part of something small or a small part of something big? And it's that balance, dude. But so let me ask you this. Oh God.
I was going to say, Matt Harris said this, and if you're stuck and you're a founder trying to figure out, should I raise money? Should I not raise money? What does the business need? So there's two things. There's two ways to look at it. There's like, you personally, do I want to run a company but before you look at you, take a step back and say, what does this business actually need to be successful? And there are some businesses where you have to raise capital, right? SpaceX would not exist if Elon didn't go out and raise a bunch of money because it's expensive to build rockets. But when it comes to software, there's usually options, right? You could be that hockey stick rocket ship. We're going to raise the capital and try to be like Airbnb. And maybe that's what the market calls for. Maybe that's what the business needs because it's a take all or nothing. But if you're in like a niche, you might have options. Like you could do both. And so I think looking at what does the business actually need right now to succeed? And if you're like, we figured it out, we've got a repeatable process, remove myself from it for a second. If I was making a decision for somebody else about this business based on what the business needs, what decision would I make? And then you also need to bring in, what kind of lifestyle do I want? What kind of business do I want to run? But based on the opportunity and what you've built, I think it's a helpful kind of framework because these are emotional decisions, right? It's like your baby. And it's so hard as a founder to separate you from the business, because when you're pitching to customers, to investors, to employees, to your spouse, to your parents, your kids, like it's so linked to you.
Oh yeah.
That it's so hard to separate it. So anyway, that's a good framework to think about. How do I make that decision? And it just gives you another point of view to look at that question of, should I raise or should I not raise?
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm big into personal development. I've worked with multiple mindset coaches throughout the time, not like the foo-foo, hoorah, can you do it, but almost break down what's standing in your way in your own brain. And one of the biggest things I realized that I was weak at. I've always been good at sales for my companies. I am the softest person when it comes to my own business. Like I fold quicker. I don't want to upset people. And so I had to make this like frame shift of, all right, yeah, this is my business, but what if I actually just worked for the business? What if that was the conversations that I were having? And it sounds maybe a bit weird, but it works. It helps me think that way. Okay, these aren't my decisions to make any longer. I am working on behalf of the company, and these are the set guidelines I have to follow in order to hit the next stage. So I'm with you, man.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Right. Yeah. Somebody I've heard, I can't remember who it was to attribute to him, but who do I need to be in this meeting? I'm walking into an investor meeting. Who do I need to be? Take that moment of what do I need to like, because the way you show up in an investor meeting is different than the way you need to show up for an employee that's struggling, the way you need to show up for a customer call. Who is it that I need to be in this meeting? And that's a good frame to your point of take that step back of what does it take to actually go sell this thing and not get into, oh, it's my baby founder. Okay. Yeah. So I love that. I think that's great, Pat. I think that's a great way to approach it.
Yeah. All right. Getting back to your stories. Okay. You've raised ARP, right? Or you've had success with ARP. You've had success with the school. You're now in the NIL space and you've got two different personas. What's the conversation like between you and Andrew at that point in time? What's the mindset? Is it now, hey, new phase of excitement because we found our direction? Or is it more pressure to succeed because you're starting in a new space? What was that all like?
I would say at that point, it was definitely excitement because it was like, oh, we've kind of figured it out. Okay, this is the thing. And like NIL's huge. It's like the biggest thing that's going on, at least in the college sports athletic space. And there's all these states that have financial literacy requirements. Like, oh, this is perfect. They require financial literacy. We've got a tailwind. It's a compliance solution. Like we're going to help them stay compliant and we're going to drive these better outcomes, which is what we ultimately care about. And we're like, oh, this is great. The issue is that nobody's following the main NIL laws. It's an absolute, if you watch college athletics, especially football, basketball, it's an absolute shit show. It's all over the place, right? One state has a law that contradicts with the federal law that contradicts with the NCAA rules. And the NCAA is just fighting to stay relevant, essentially, and stay an organization. Who's going to pay attention to the subset of the state law? And what we also learned is that just the athletic departments, the compliance departments need to check a box. So there's ways they can check that box. And also nobody's looking at that anyway. There's no enforcement. So there wasn't a tailwind like we thought. And instead it was like, the thing that people were really excited about NIL was like get into deals. And we didn't want to go down that path. Mm-hmm. We went down that. We did have some success. Like we were having some impact, but it was like a nice to have versus selling something that schools needed. And we thought we were going to sell something that was needed. So it took us a little while to figure that out. But you can tell, right, when in sales, you can tell when you're like really having to drag people across the line, and you can get them there eventually, but there's just so many hurdles, and you can just tell versus when it's like, oh, wow, I have product market fit because these conversations are going easier. There's clearly a value prop that's easy for them to articulate. I don't have to keep going back and forth and have 8 conversations about why personal finance and why staying compliant is a good thing. This is ridiculous. Why are we having so many conversations? This should be obvious, right? Law, have impact. Why would you not do this? We can help with, recruiting, all this stuff. And it's like, nah, it's just not we're fine. We're fine. So even though we saw this great opportunity and we saw this new vision, we just couldn't get the buyers to see it. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that decide whether there's a market or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So at that point, do we pivot again? Or are we like, what are we doing, dude? What are we thinking here?
Yeah, but we're thinking that the whole time. What are we thinking? How can we and I will say a big failure of mine and one of my weaknesses for sure is that a little bit of shiny object syndrome. It was like, oh, this is really cool. Let's look at that. Oh, this is really cool. Let's look at that.
Yeah.
And you hear whatever, the Steve Jobs quotes, like, you got to say no to the 1,000 things to focus on the 1 or 2 that matter. And it's true, but you don't see it because you're like, oh, this is kind of working. Let's try this. Maybe this will really help. And you end up just like going boom, 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 and like ping-ponging back and forth rather than going in a straight direction or like somewhat in the right direction. You just end up going over here and then over there. And so I did a really poor job of holding the vision, which I think is one of the core things that you have to do as a founder, because nobody else can hold the vision for the company. Like, you are the visionary. You hold the vision and the mission. And this is the thing, and you'll hear it, I think, if you listen to even the way Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg to this day will talk about their businesses, they still talk about what that North Star is. Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, his whole famous first rule of investing, don't lose money. Second rule, don't forget the first rule.
Yeah.
That he talks about that stuff all the time. If you read his annual reports and the way he communicates, it's front and center. But we're here to make money, and we're here to do it in a way that like protects the capital. And that's like, that is their North Star. That's their vision. And you just got to do that. And I will say that I did not do a very good job of that. And I think that's one of the things that personally I failed at and have tried to get better at and still struggle with to this day, is really holding that focus. Yeah, I guess to your point, Pat, oh, this is exciting. So we would go from one excitement to another excitement, but we never stick long enough doing something to figure out if it worked or not. So there's this whole idea of like iterate quickly, iterate quickly, iterate quickly. And you can justify not being focused because, oh, well, I've got to iterate quickly. Well, the whole point to iterate quickly is in the same direction so that you actually learn something. If my customer truly is athletic departments and college athletic departments, then it doesn't matter that I want to focus on personal finance. I need to figure out, and it can be still related to that, but maybe it really is the NIL thing. Maybe we just never figured that out. What is their true pain point? We want this, and let's see if we can, hamstring this into there. And so while we were doing this though, we're like, we need to make money. We got to figure this out. We've got this app that works. We've got this concept. And so we did test something, which was these trivia events. And this is how we worked with a lot of the athletic departments and colleges, because we get asked to come speak. They just wouldn't want to pay us, but they'd ask us to come in all the time. And so we developed this trivia event, essentially, that was just personal finance. We could customize the topic. We could get based on the audience, whether they were versed in personal finance, whether we want to focus on one topic or the other. Made it super gamified, something super fun. And we always had an offer, take an action. We want you to actually take an action. That's the core thesis for us, is that there's plenty of personal finance tools out there. All the information's out there, but how do you get people to actually take that action? I could understand how compound interest works, but if I never buy a stock or start compounding, it doesn't matter that I conceptually understand how it works. I'm going to end up in the same place as the guy that's never heard of it, or the gal that's never heard of it. So we started doing these events, and we were like, we need to make money. And we had done some affiliate relationships already. And so we started partnering with companies like Chime and Acorns. And that was the offer. It was like, hey, look, we just did this whole thing on why investing is important. We did some education, made it super fun. We gave away prizes, partnerships with Liquid Death and Red Bull and Chipotle and Chick-fil-A and local burrito shops around college campuses. And it was just fun. We're like, if we can make it fun, people will pay attention to us. And maybe we can get them to do something like that's good for them. And it worked. We got 41% of, we had to tell them this, not every event hit that, but of people that attended events, they like applied or started to apply for that product, whether it was Chime or Acorns, whatever that was. And we were putting good things like, no, you can't do credit card offers. There's a bunch of things that you're not allowed to do on the college marketing space for good reasons. There's laws out there about that. So we were focusing on deposit accounts that were positive, that had an impact. And we were driving outcomes like, wow, there's some events where we're making $2,500 for an event. That's great. And then there's others where we made $80. Yeah. And so we're like, wow, this is actually really interesting. But what we got really good at was figuring out, how do you get into the mind of a young person and get them to take one of these actions that are good for them? And that's what we became experts in. And so from there, it was like, who are we really serving? Obviously, we're working with the college students, and we've got this mission impact. But the value, the business value, are the companies that are getting these new customers. So who struggles the most with getting new customers? Like banks are struggle to compete with fintechs. You start talking to banks, realize we're not at all at a scale where they're interested, and they already have their own college marketing teams that they put, millions of dollars behind. So they're not going to work with us. But credit unions came up. And so we started talking to credit unions and realized, you know what, there actually is something here. They have an older member base that's higher than banks and fintechs. Like the average, I think, credit union customer is like mid-50s, 56 or something. Some credit unions are even in the 60s. But at the same time, they've got good rates, and they're a nonprofit, and they've got all these things that kind of align, if you can explain it right, to younger folks. So that's where we made the pivot, was, okay, let's just get super focused and let's ignore everything else. We're only going to go after credit unions. And not only are we only going to go after credit unions, we're only going to focus on credit unions that are geographically within our area that we can physically go to. And that was the pivot that we made. Financial services was Q1 last year. And then focusing on credit unions was really in Q2 and really the back half, mostly Q3, Q4 of last year was where that's where we've been focused. And now we're starting to see compounding where it's like, it takes a while, but I've gone to 4 or 5 of the same credit union, trade union events that they do, their little chapter local meetings in Mobile and in Huntsville and Cleveland, Tennessee. But I keep seeing the same people and they're like, wait, don't you tell me what you do again? And I've built these relationships now where we're actually starting to see them turn into real opportunities. And so,
Awesome.
And also you get to hear what they actually care about. In terms of our pivot, that's how it happened is we've just gotten smarter. We just got to get super focused. And there's been times even over the last 9 months where maybe we should try this thing. And we're like, no, we got to stop. We got to stop. Credit union. Let's not go try to do a parent offering. Let's not try to go do, because you hear people make all these suggestions of what you should do or what you could do. And they're not wrong necessarily, but you've just got to figure out what makes sense right now and where to dedicate the resources. That's what I've really been trying to focus on. And Andrew and I've really been trying to focus on. Let's just get hyper focused on one specific customer segment and see if we can make it work. And Pat, what's funny, we talked about startups that you compete with and whatever. There's this one company that started off doing something very similar to what we've done. They've probably raised $6 million already, but they literally made the exact same pivot that we have. And we had no idea. We looked at it and we're like, they did that pivot. They did that pivot. We did that pivot. And I think they're doing great. They've got money. They've been able to pay themselves. So that's probably a great way to do it. We also own pretty much all of the business. Besides, we have raised 180-ish K, which is from AARP and then through friends and family, essentially on a friends and family round. But like we control the business in a way that they don't. Now, that doesn't mean that either one of us will be successful. It's just different ways to build and it's taken us longer. And they're not doing the same strategy because they've got VC dollars. So they're like on all the fintech podcasts and the credit, they're paying for a lot of that media. And we're going to local chapter meetings. So that we're not seeing them there because why are they going to go to a chapter meeting in Mobile, Alabama? So it's just different, but we can do that because we didn't raise that money from a revenue perspective. We don't need as much revenue for it to be meaningful as it does for them to be able to raise their next round. And they did just raise, so they're doing something right. I'm not knocking them at all, but it's just interesting. There's just different ways to build businesses.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up that way. Like there's value in doing the unscalable, I would say. Like when I started Invest Clearly and I was telling people the process that I go through, the constant things out here, that's not scalable. That's not scalable. That's not scalable. Like I'm reviewing every single review. I'm one-on-one having demos with like limited partners who, okay, it's not scalable in that industry, but like it's going well, right? There's a lot of deep relationships being built based on it's a differentiator that no one else is doing because it's not scalable. So like I see serious value in, will it play out? To be determined, right? I'm not saying we've separated ourselves by any means, but those little things, they add up. It's you are in this thing. You are driving to all of these meetups. You are attending all of these events where these big guys are just dumping money and trying to do it at a mass quantity. I don't know. I feel like those little things compound.
They definitely do. I hope you're right there, Pat. I think
they
do. But the thing is, you do learn a lot. Like when you do the things that aren't scalable, then you know what to build. People are like, oh, let's scale systems. There's so many people that over-engineer products. And we did that. We built 95% of the stuff we built, we shouldn't have built.
Yeah, us too.
We burned so much money building stuff because, that would be cool. Or we should do that. That would automate this process. But the process doesn't work. So why are we automating a process that we haven't proven yet? You're figuring out the process that works. And once it works, then you can go automate it. And then you can make it scalable. I totally agree. It's one of those things that people always talk about. So go ahead.
Yeah. I would say we went through the same thing early on. We spent so much time and money automating this one step, like full scale. It was mental, like endless strategy calls. Then all of a sudden we're like, what's the actual business value of this that we can't get out of reviews? And then we just shut it down. And it was brutal, but it was like, all right, we probably should have slowed down a little bit here and actually thought about the value of it rather than it being a super cool feature that no one else is doing. That's just what it was.
Yeah, sometimes people aren't doing things, but there's a reason they're not doing them. Maybe it's their business structure, they can't do it because they're too big, or maybe it's because that's actually not a good idea.
Yeah, it's simple. Yeah, it was like, this could work, but what about these other 3,000 things that go along with it that we can't do in order for it to work? There's so many things that went into it. But cool, man. Hey, I know we're wrapping up soon, but so what's the future look like? You guys have found your place. Now it's get as many people on it and at the event and credit union? Like, what's the plan, I guess, the next year?
Yeah, it's to find the first 100 credit unions. Like that's where we're at. We got to figure out how to do it. And that's the thing. Like we've got a process that works. We've got something that's valuable. The question is, can we sell it before we run out of money and do something else? That's the thing. And at some point, when do you run out? Even when you are, and that's the thing is we don't have a huge burn rate or anything like that. But at some point, you got to figure out like, is this working or is it not? You've got to get enough time. And I think that's one of the things that we haven't done a great job of by being focused. And so the focus is let's be very focused and we'll know whether it works or not, because there's always ways to expand and move outside of credit unions if that's the opportunity or move in a different direction. But can we get this one customer segment that we know probably the most valuable? We're in the best position to serve right now compared to other companies, other organizations. Can we get them to pay enough for this? And can we get enough of them to pay us for us to prove that there's legitimate business here that we can continue to then scale up and figure out what the future looks like? So that's where we're at. I feel like it's always a little bit of a survival stage and we've made plenty of mistakes. I feel good about our strategy now when we're able to start thinking about, oh, now we've had enough conversations where maybe this is the opportunity to get away from services and be a little more software focused. And because like I said, we're a little more tech enabled services right now. So that's where we're at. It's still always a little existential at a startup. You're always on the cusp of either a mountain of success or falling off a cliff and to 1,000 pieces. That's where we're at. And I think one of the things that I had flipped a switch, and I would say this probably happened over the last really 4 months, is that disconnecting my value, personal value, from whether the company's successful or not. Because I think when you mentioned like the way that I treat my own sales calls as a founder is different than when I was someone else's company. You just have so much of your own persona and caught up that can get in your head from actually executing. And that's something that it's been a lot. I've honestly been talking to other founders that have struggled with it and have managed to do it and have to shut down businesses or have sold it, had success, and then struggled mentally afterward. Those conversations be like, I get it. it. And then being able to have conversations with other founders where, oh shoot, I actually have learned something. I actually do, even though it feels like maybe I haven't gotten financially successful where I'd like to be, I actually know a lot. And like, I've actually learned a ton. Like if I were to do this again or help other people do it, like I can avoid a lot of mistakes. So I think recognizing the value in the journey, even if you're not at a pot of gold, has been something that I've been working on and has been a big focus. So I don't know. Where are you, Pat? Where are you in your journey?
It's so funny you say that. That's big for me too right now. Cause I'm terrified of that. Is what happens if, and I haven't been able to disconnect or see the value of what I'm learning. And I have to have that conversation with Anna all the time because it constantly gets brought up. If this doesn't work, then am I being left behind in these 3 things? Like, will I be able to come back? And it's such like a psychological battle in that. It's wild you brought that up because literally all the time I'm talking to Anna about this. It's this overarching fear of, first of all, this is the first time I've ever gone public with something. Like I'm putting myself out there. With Invest Clearly, it's its own business, but as of right now, I guarantee you 99% of the people that know Invest Clearly don't know the other founders. Like my face is on it, my brand is on it. And so that's heavy. Like that's super heavy. And then if it goes down, what's next? What's next for me? And you can't think about that, right? Like you have these thoughts, then as a plan B idea is bullshit when you're in the thick of it because you really can't. And so those devilish thoughts come in and out quickly, but then you realize the connections you've made and how quickly things can change. But you go back to this, I don't know if it's naivety or if it's unbelievable conviction, right? Finding the certainty in chaos where it's, that was a quick thought, now I'm back. It's just this weird roller coaster.
Yeah, you got to let it go. Yeah. I started playing tennis. I'd played tennis when I was a little bit younger, but hadn't played in a while. My fiance, she's a big tennis player. We started playing tennis again. And when you're going to throw up your second serve, if you're thinking about double faulting, you're going to double fault, but you're probably still going to think about it. You just got to let it go and be like, nah, I'm going to get this one in. Otherwise, you're going to hit it straight in the net. And there you go. It's like that same thing. You just got to, like you said, Pat, you just got to like let that thought pass. But yeah, man, I'm excited. You guys are doing it's hard. Maybe it's hard on the inside, but on the outside looking in, you guys are doing great. You got first customers and paying customers, and they're like big price tag relative to what a lot of startups are able to charge. We found a good niche, and obviously everything's a little existential, but like, you're doing the right things. And the fact that you've gotten there's plenty of startups that never make any revenue ever. Like they never make any money. And
Yeah,
you guys are doing that. So
it's hard. I don't think it's hard to see, right? Like, it's that balance between conviction, it's going great, and then it's, or am I just in it and I think I'm doing better than I am? You know what I mean? I will attribute a lot of, I'm sure you had this relationship with Andrew, but there's a ton of value in having that person, so you're not just in your own brain where, yeah, maybe I'm having a rough day and I talk to my partner about it, because all it comes back to is it's value. Is this going to be valuable enough for someone? Number one, pay for it, and then after they pay for it, to keep using it, and after they use it, to renew, and then enough to tell other people, can I do this again? And then it's, oh yeah, I signed somebody, like, was it a fluke? And you luckily have that support team internally where it's, I don't know. And it's, no, this is the reason, we're doing all right. We got to get to this point. So it's good.
yeah,
But
that's awesome.
I love talking to you. And the last time I actually talked to you, besides the most recent one, was right when you guys were launching L. So it's been a little while. I distinctly remember that conversation because I had no idea what it was. But no, I appreciate you coming on. If people want to follow along, where can they learn more about Ostrich and you?
Yeah, let's see. I guess you can follow me LinkedIn, William Glass, and if you type in Ostrich, I'll pop right up. And Ostrich, you can get ostrich.com. Any credit, just let us know. But
Yeah.
I guess just on LinkedIn, I haven't been super active on the socials lately, but yeah, I think I probably need to get back to it. But LinkedIn's probably the best place.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, man.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Pat. I appreciate it. And yeah, keep on fighting the good fight. So
You too.
you're doing great.
Thanks, dude. I appreciate it.